When was the last time kindness broke your heart? At 19, I started working at a small cafe where I met Arthur, an elderly man who came in every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. He always ordered the same thing, 2 sunny-side-up eggs, bacon, and cinnamon French toast. But what caught my attention was how he'd order a second plate of French toast, wrap it carefully in napkins, and take it with him. One morning, when business was slow, I asked him about it. His eyes lit up as he told me about his wife, Clara, who was in the nursing home down the street. She had severe dementia and barely recognized anyone, but she still lit up at the taste of cinnamon French toast. It was our first date, he explained. I was so nervous I spilled syrup all over my shirt. He laughed, but his eyes were wet. Soon, I started making his French toast extra special, adding a touch more cinnamon, making sure the edges were perfectly crispy, the way Clara liked it. Arthur would beam every time, telling me how Clara had managed a few bites that day. But what really got me was catching him eating alone in his car some mornings. When I'd bring his order out, he'd quickly wipe his eyes and give me that same warm smile. One day, I finally asked him about it. Some days she doesn't remember how to eat, he whispered. But I still bring it, just in case today's different. I started clocking in early just to make his French toast myself. The other waitresses thought I was crazy, but seeing Arthur's face made it worth it. He'd tell me stories about Clara, how she was a kindergarten teacher, how she'd leave little love notes in his lunch, even after 40 years of marriage. Then one morning, Arthur didn't come in, or the next day, or the one after that. A week later, he shuffled in, looking 20 years older. Clara had a bad fall, he said. She's not eating anymore. I made his French toast anyway. He just stared at it. Would you like to come with me? He asked suddenly. To meet her. She's having a good day today. At the nursing home, Clara was tiny in her bed, bruised from her fall, but her eyes were bright when Arthur walked in. He introduced me as the angel who makes our French toast. To my shock, Clara smiled and said, "You make it extra crispy on the edges." It was the most lucid thing she'd say during my visit. Arthur's hands shook as he tried to cut the French toast into bite-sized pieces. Without thinking, I took the knife and fork from him. "Let me," I said. For 30 minutes, I watched as Arthur patiently fed his wife, telling her about his morning, about the weather, about everything and nothing. She drifted in and out, sometimes looking at him like a stranger, other times squeezing his hand. I started visiting with Arthur every few days after my Clara had more bad days than good, but Arthur never missed a morning, even when she threw the French toast at him, even when she screamed that she didn't know him, even when she couldn't swallow anymore, and he just sat there, holding the cold toast in her hand. The morning Clara died, Arthur came into the cafe at his usual time, ordered his usual. I silently made 2 plates of French toast. He looked at the second plate for a long time. "She would have loved these," he said. "They're extra crispy on the edge." I sat with him until he finished both plates. He left me a $100 tip and a note. "Thank you for making her last year taste like our first date." I quit the cafe a month later for a better paying job, but I still wake up early every Sunday to make cinnamon French toast extra crispy on the edges. I think about Arthur and Clara and how sometimes the biggest acts of love are the smallest things we do every day, especially when they break our hearts. The thing is, I never thought I'd see Arthur again after I left the cafe, but 6 months later, while I was working my new job as a credit union teller, this familiar voice came through the drive-through window. "Could I make a deposit?" I looked up and there was Arthur. But something was different. He was wearing a nice hat and had a suitcase in his passenger seat. "Are you going somewhere?" I asked. "Oregon," he said, pushing an envelope through the window. "My daughter keeps asking me to live closer to her and the grandkids, but I wanted to give you this first." The envelope contained $5,000 and a photo. In the picture, Arthur and Clara stood in front of this very cafe, both young and smiling. Clara was wearing a cafe uniform, just like mine. "Clara worked here before you," he said. "This was how we met. She made me French toast every morning for 6 months before I had the courage to ask her out. The manager is still the same guy from back then, old Sal. Ask him about Clara. He has more photos in his office." I felt something shift in my chest. I had no idea. "We wanted to tell you, but the timing never felt right," Arthur said. "Clara wanted me to give you her recipe. It's on the back of the photo, and she wanted you to know that you reminded her of herself when she was young." That's when I noticed Clara's handwriting on the back of the photo. Not just a recipe, but a message. "To the girl who makes French toast like love itself. Thank you for taking care of my Arthur when I couldn't anymore. Keep the edges crispy, Clara." My eyes started burning. When did she write this? 3 months before she passed, Arthur. She had a clear date and insisted. Kept saying she had to thank the French toast angel before it was too late. I processed his deposit with shaking hands. When I gave him his receipt, he held on to my hand for a moment. "Don't feel guilty about the job you left. This place prepared you for something bigger, just like it did for Clara." After Arthur drove away, I went back inside and found old Sal, the owner. His eyes got misty when I mentioned Clara. 60 years ago, she started exactly where you did. worked here for 2 years before she became a teacher, told me she learned how to take care of people by serving them breakfast. He pulled out a dusty photo album from his desk drawer, page after page of the cafe's history. There was Clara at 19, looking so much like me it was startling. There were photos of her and Arthur getting married, coming back to celebrate anniversaries, bringing their daughter, even bringing their granddaughter. They came in every year on their anniversary, Sal said. Even after Clara got sick, Arthur would order 2 plates of French toast and tell everyone about their first date. Said it was the most important meal of his life. Looking through those photos, I realized something that changed how I saw everything. My job at the cafe wasn't just it was part of a story that started decades before me and would continue long after. Every plate I served, every customer I remembered, every extra touch of care, it all mattered more than I knew. That Sunday, I made my usual French toast, extra crispy on the edge, but this time, I invited my coworkers from the credit union. I told them Arthur and Clara's story, about how love can hide in the smallest acts, about how taking care of people never really ends. One of them asked, "Do you ever regret leaving the cafe?" I thought about, no, because now I help people with their money, so they can have first dates and 40-year anniversaries and French toast mornings of their own. 6 months later, I got a letter from Oregon. Arthur had sent a photo of himself on the beach with his grandkid. On the back he'd written, "Teaching the next generation how to make French toast. They're getting pretty good at those crispy edges." But there was more. Inside the envelope was another photo. This one showed Arthur at a new cafe in Oregon. He was behind the counter wearing an apron, and sitting at the counter was an elderly woman, who looked familiar. A post-it note was stuck to this photo. Met Helen at the senior center. She comes in every morning at 7 a.m. for pancakes. Getting ready to ask her to the movies. Wish me luck, Arthur. I pinned both photos to my cubicle at the credit union. People ask about them all the time. I tell them the truth, that these photos remind me that life moves in circles, that love finds ways to repeat itself, and that kindness breeds more kindness. But what I don't tell them is what happened next. Last month, a young girl came into the credit union with her grandmother. While waiting in line, I overheard the girl ask, "Grandma, why do you always order the same thing at breakfast?" The grandmother smiled. "Because the first time your grandfather took me out, I ordered French toast. Every time I eat it, I remember that morning." I looked up from my teller window. The grandmother was Helen, the woman from Arthur's photo. When they reached my window, Helen gasped, "You're the French toast girl. Arthur told me all about you." Before I could respond, she continued, "He proposed last week, said he finally learned that love doesn't end with goodbye. It just finds new ways to say hello." My throat tightened. "Congratulations. We're getting married next month at the senior center," Helen said. Arthur insisted on cinnamon French toast for the reception. Said he knows someone who makes the best batch this side of anywhere. That's when it all came together. The circle completed itself in ways I never expected. I wasn't just a small part of Arthur and Clara's story, I was the bridge to Arthur and Helen's beginning. I started crying right there at the teller window. A line had formed behind them, but nobody seemed to mind. Sometimes truth hits you like that, sudden and overwhelming. "I'll be there," I managed to say, "and I'll bring the French toast." Helen's granddaughter looked up at me. "Can you teach me how to make it? My mom says I should learn family recipes." I glanced at Helen, who nodded through her own tears. "Of course, we'll start with getting the edges extra crispy." That Sunday, instead of making French toast alone, I invited Helen's granddaughter over. Her name was Lily, and she was 8. As we cooked, I told her about Arthur and Clara, about cafes and love stories, about how food can carry memories across decades. "My teacher says I should write about my family history," Lily said, carefully watching me flip the toast. "Can I write about this?" "Write about anything you want," I said, thinking about how stories connect us all. That's when Lily said something that stopped me cold. "My grandma says you look exactly like her old friend Clara did at the cafe. She has the photo by her bed." I looked at this child with flour on her nose and syrup on her fingers, and realized that Clara's story, Arthur's story, was still being written through me, through Helen, through Lily. After Lily left, I sat at my kitchen table, looking at Clara's recipe card, now splattered with at the bottom. Clara had written something I hadn't noticed before. "Love is like French toast. Sometimes it gets cold, sometimes it falls apart, but if you add enough cinnamon and make the edges crispy enough, it always brings people home." I started making an extra batch of French toast every Sunday, not for myself but to freeze and give to people who need it. The elderly couple down the hall, the single mom working 2 jobs, the recent widow who orders takeout every night. One Sunday morning, my phone rang. It was Lily. "Miss Sophie, Grandma Helen and Arthur want you to come over. They're practicing their first dance for the wedding. They're playing the song from their first date." When I arrived at Helen's house, Arthur answered the door in his best suit. His eyes crinkled when he smiled. The French toast angel returns. In the living room, Helen wore a pale blue dress. The song playing was Moon River. Arthur took my hand and Helen's, standing us in a small circle. Before we practice, he said, voice wavering, I need to tell you both something. That morning, Clara passed. Her last words were about French toast. She said, promise me you'll teach someone else. He looked at me. I thought I was bringing Clara's love to you through those breakfast orders. But really, you were carrying it forward all along. Helen stepped closer. When Arthur first told me about you, I was jealous. How could I compete with a love story that beautiful? But then I understood. I'm not competing. I'm continuing. The three of us stood there, connected by grief and joy, by past love and new beginnings. Lily came in from the kitchen. The French toast is ready. We sat around Helen's dining table. Arthur, Helen, Lily, and me. 4 place settings. Fresh French toast with crispy edges. But there was something else on the table. A new stack of photos. Lily had made a scrapbook. Photos of Arthur and Clara. Photos of me at the cafe. Photos of Arthur meeting Helen. And new photos of all of us together, making French toast, laughing, creating new memories. This is my family history project, Lily announced proudly. My teacher says families aren't just blood. They're the people who feed you, and take care of you, and teach you how to make French toast the right. As we ate, Arthur told Helen about our Sunday morning ritual, how we'd drive to Clara's favorite spots, the park where he proposed, the cafe where they met, the old house where they raised their daughter. I'd like to join you sometimes, Helen said softly. If that's okay. Arthur reached across the table to hold both her hand and mine. Clara would love that. The conversation turned to the wedding. Simple ceremony, just family and close friends. Cinnamon French toast instead of cake. Purple irises, Clara's favorite flower, alongside yellow roses for Helen. I'm hiring a food truck, Arthur said, run by young people just starting out, like you two were. Lily perked up. Can I help serve the French toast? Of course, I said. Every good French toast maker needs an apprentice. After breakfast, Arthur and Helen practiced their dance while Lily and I cleaned up. Through the kitchen window, we watched them sway slowly to old songs. Arthur's steps were steadier now, his shoulders less burdened. Do you think they'll have babies? Lily asked while drying dishes. I laughed. They have grandchildren and great-grandchildren already. But they might have other kinds of babies. New traditions, new favorite places, new Sunday morning routines. Like French toast families instead of French toast babies. Exactly. Later that day, I got a call from Sal at the cafe. Sophie, I'm thinking of retiring. The place is getting harder to manage. Would you be interested in buying it? My heart skipped a beat. Me? But I don't have that kind of money. I'm not talking about money, Sal said. I'm talking about continuing what Clara started. What you've been doing every Sunday, making French toast that changes lives. I thought about the cafe, where it all began. About Clara working there at 19, meeting Arthur, creating a love story that would span generations. About me, learning the same lessons, making the same discoveries. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Clara's recipe card, Arthur's photos, and a blank notebook. I started writing. Once upon a time, there was a cafe, where every French toast order came with a side of love. 3 months later, the wedding took place. Simple, beautiful, exactly as planned. I wore the dress Clara had worn to her own wedding. Arthur had saved it all these years. Helen wore yellow roses in her hair, and served French toast with perfect, crispy edges to all 6. When she came to my table, she whispered, I made extra batches for the angels who couldn't be here. Arthur's daughter gave a toast about how love doesn't delete the past. It adds to it. How losing someone doesn't mean stopping your heart. It means making room for more. During their first dance, Arthur and Helen invited me to join them. Then Lily, then Arthur's daughter. Soon, everyone was dancing, connected in this circle of love that started with 2 plates of French toast 60 years ago. After the wedding, I stood in the cafe's empty parking lot, keys in my hand. Tomorrow I'd open it under my name. Clara's Kitchen, since 1960. Yours are crispy and golden brown. Now spread them. I looked up at the dark sky, thinking about all the mornings I'd wake up at 5 to prep for the breakfast rush, how the smell of cinnamon would fill the air, how customers would share their stories over plates of perfectly crispy French toast. The next morning, I opened the cafe at 5 a.m. sharp. At 6 a.m., the door I looked up from the prep counter, expecting my first customer. It was Lily, wearing an apron she'd decorated herself. Across the chest, she'd written Junior Angel in Training. Grandma and Arthur said, I could help on weekends, she explained. They said every love story needs good food. I handed her Arthur's favorite coffee mug. Want to learn how to make the eggs just right? Extra runny, always extra runny. As Lily cracked eggs with a concentration that mirrored Arthur's careful movements when he fed Clara, I realized something profound. I'd spent a year thinking I was learning about love from Arthur and Clara's story, but the truth was bigger than that. I was living inside a love story that began before me, and would continue after me. Every French toast recipe passed down, every Sunday morning ritual, every act of kindness, they were all pages in this endless book of love. The door chimed again. 2 elderly men entered, arguing about baseball. Behind them, a young couple, sleepy-eyed and holding hands. Then, a woman in a nurse's uniform picking up coffee before her shift. Table or counter? I asked each of them. They all chose tables. As I took their orders, Lily watched carefully. When I delivered the first plate, 2 eggs, sunny side up, bacon and cinnamon French toast. The elderly man looked up, surprised. I didn't order French toast. I smiled, setting it down anyway. It's on the house. You might find you need it today. It was only as I headed back to the kitchen that I saw what I'd done. I'd given him Arthur's exact order, down to the plate position. The French toast sat at precisely 2 L's on, just as Clara used to place it. The universe works in circles. Sometimes love flows forward in unexpected currents. And occasionally, if you pay attention, you can see the angel's fingerprints on things, even if they're just flour-dusted and smell like cinnamon. At the end of that first day, after Lily had carefully counted the tips and I'd wiped down all the tables, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a $50 bill and a note in shaky handwriting. Thank you for the French toast. I'm meeting my estranged son for coffee tomorrow. Haven't seen him in 5 years. Needed courage. Robert. I pinned the note to the bulletin board behind the register, the first of many that would come, because this is what I learned from Arthur and Clara, from Helen and Lily, from every customer who would walk through these doors. Love isn't just about grand gestures or forever promises. It's about showing up every day with crispy edges and runny eggs. It's about knowing someone's order by heart. It's about making extra space at the table for the ones who need it. The cafe still opens at 5 a.m. Lily still helps on weekends. Arthur and Helen come every anniversary, now with their blended family. Sometimes it's hard to tell where one love story ends and another begins. And sometimes late at night after closing, I'll make a batch of French toast just to get the recipe right, extra crispy on the edges, just like Clara taught me.